Hi everyone, this is Alberto from the London Contemporary School of Piano, and this was a little musical example that introduces the topic of today. I am delighted to talk about one of my favorite topics of harmony, which is chromatic harmony. Effectively, today we're going to look at how to use chromaticism in your chord progressions. It's a beautiful technique that is going to enrich with nuances your improvisation, and it's going to allow you to ornament harmonically the music that you play. But let me just say, before I continue, if you love what we're doing at the London Contemporary School of Piano, make sure you head onto our website, contemporaryschoolofpiano.com. You will find a free resource kit that has material from our tutorials and a lot of other cool and musical stuff as well. Let's first start with a bit of terminology and definition. This will help us be very clear on what we are going to do. What is chromaticism? Chromaticism is a term that comes from the world of visual arts. Effectively describes the movement between two colors, the shades that happen between two different colors. And music theory have stolen this term to describe the movement between, melodic movement particularly, between two notes that exist in the diatonic system. Wait, diatonic, what does diatonic mean? Diatonic is effectively the opposite of chromatic. When we encounter a major scale or a major key, such as C major, we're looking at 7 different notes. Each one appears only once in the scale, and this system, so described, is diatonic. Chromaticism offers us the opportunity to alter any of these notes by a sharp or a flat, and effectively create this chromatic effect, this sense of tension that we encounter in music so often. Of course, a diatonic system doesn't only refers to white keys. This is only the case for C major, that does not have any alteration in key. But this applies to every key signature. So effectively, chromaticism is a way to alter the 7 original notes in the key signatures. So this includes sharps, flats, but also natural signs. So today we're going to look at first melodic chromaticism briefly, and then we're gonna explore harmonic chromaticism. Let's take, for example, a movement from the chord of C and the chord of G. Melodically, I'm going to move from the note C to the note of D. See, this C sharp is not part of the key of C, and of course I'm using it as a bridge, as a chromatic bridge between the two notes. Of course, in the key of C major, we are looking at 5 extra notes that can behave as our chromatic bridge. But the key to understand this is that we're gonna have in mind very clearly the starting note and the ending note. In this particular case, I'm starting from a note belonging to the chord of C to a note belonging to a chord of G. And now I'm going to give you an example of how to use very simple chords, for example, C, G, and F, and ornament my melody with as many chromatic notes as I can. Your melody can become pretty rich and interesting in this way. Effectively, I I enjoy to explore this topic, this approach melodically, because it allows me to get out of my 7 notes scale, whichever it is, effectively looking for opportunities to be more expressive, to add more tension. But a tension that, like any ornament, like any nuance, if you do a little bit too much or too often, it starts becoming less expressive. I consider effectively chromaticism like parsley. It goes everywhere, it goes well everywhere, but if you do too much, it becomes pointless and tasteless. So I'm going to do a little run, a little exercise where I move slowly from chords in the key of C major and talk you through on what kind of chromaticism I'm using, from which note to which note. So let's start. So on chord of C, I'm going to A via F chord. I'm going to B via G chord. Again. And now to E via C. Notice how my chromaticism work, because in my mind, as I was saying earlier, I have decided very clearly what note I'm landing to. If I have very clear that in my mind, I can make that note being preceded by a chromatic note. So this little musical example shows us one musical principle, one harmonic principle, that effectively the chromaticism is a melodic note in between the notes of the chord. But we feel it. We can hear when the note gets out of our diatonic system. We can hear it. We can hear it as an alteration of the original fundamental tonal system that we are in. I encourage you to not only experiment on any chord sequence, on any chord passage, on any movement between notes, but I also encourage you to hear the difference, to hold on your temptation to make it resolve. For example, that little tension, the little dissonance that you're creating is going to effectively train your ear to enjoy these tensions and to build a little repertoire of solutions that work for you. Final note, referring to the initial distinction between diatonic and chromatic, we know that chromaticism effectively happens on semitones, turning a note into a sharp or flat or reverting it to natural. It's semitones, but don't confuse the notes of the scale that do move in by semitone, for example, E, F, and B to C, as chromaticism. Those are not chromaticisms. Those are actually diatonic movements. Although they move by half step or semitone, they are not chromaticism. But before I continue, let me just say that what I love about working with the London Contemporary School of Piano is meeting students such as yourself, passionate and creative about music. So if you want the opportunity to work one-to-one with me, head on to our website, fill out the form, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your musical journey. We would love to hear from you and organize some classes. But let's continue with the topic of today. Okay, let's move on to harmony now. Harmony effectively is our way to turn a chromatic note, a little link in between notes, into a full chord. This is an opportunity for us to introduce chords into our music that don't belong to the key of reference. In the case of C major, if I'm going to use a C sharp, I can add a chord of A to resolve to D. Before I tell you why this works, let's hear it again, and I recommend you play it. The C sharp doesn't belong to the key of C major, but does help reaching the chord of D minor. And D minor, coincidentally, is a key on its own. And in the key of D minor, if you know your scales, you should know that C sharp is present right there. And the chord of A represents the dominant of D minor. So, while not in C major, it helps transition into a new harmony via chromaticism. This is beautiful, and you can repeat the experiment effectively on any note. Okay? So this is one way of doing chromaticism, I would say one of the few ways that we're going to encounter in this video, particularly a chromaticism that reaches by half a step upward motion. Let's look at the chromaticism in downward motion. Let's take, for example, C chord going to a C chord where the E on top goes down to D. So this is a good solution, but I want a chord now for this E flat. So let's see, what chord could that be? I'm landing on the harmony of G major, and E flat doesn't belong to the key of G major, so perhaps we can introduce a new piece of vocabulary, the diminished 7. Diminished 7 chord. This seems to work well as a way to land on G. Let's try if it works, and then let's describe what happened afterwards. Seems to be working. Let's do a same exercise going from D to C before we tell why this works. Of course, this is the melodic passage, and I am going to play a diminished chord and land on the chord of F. Now I was on G. This seems to be working well. Let's play the full passage. Okay. Let's do it fast and see how it works. Seems pretty solid. It works. So the diminished 7th chord is like the trick that always works. The diminished 7th chord can be used to go pretty much everywhere. And exactly like the single note chromaticism, one must be cautious and not overdo it, otherwise it loses expressiveness. Diminished 7th chord, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, is a chord that has so many interesting features. It's made of 4 notes. The distance between the interval between its notes are always a minor third or 1 step and a half. And basically, the inversion of it is also another diminished 7th chord. So you have 4 different 7 diminished chords that use exactly the same notes. Look into that because it's at once extremely useful, and it is much simpler to use it and to understand it than one would think by just looking at the theory. So this chord can be used for everywhere. And I would like to give you an example on how these chords can actively give a chromatic feel to your music by harmonizing a famous tune. I was thinking about Danny Boy in using this 7 diminished chord. Every note that does not belong to one of the major harmonies will be harmonized via a diminished chord. Pretty cool, right? If you just look slowly at what I just did, maybe the first few notes, you'll see the principle is always the same, just apply to different notes of the melody. So the beginning of this melody is 4 notes, and C and E belong to the chord of C major. B and D don't. So I'm gonna use a diminished chord here and a diminished chord there. C, diminished, diminished, and now is a chord of F momentarily. Now we reach a chord of G. You can see how instead of missing the opportunity to harmonize the notes of my melody, I'm inserting a diminished 7th chord in it and effectively bringing so much chromatic tension in my music. As a final exercise, I'm going to show how to harmonize the scale of C major via chromatic chords. I'm going to use a bit of dominant 7ths, I'm going to use diminished 7ths chords, and I recommend you do it slowly and accurately in the beginning in C major, and then slowly start transposing it in different keys. So harmonizing via chromaticism the scale of C major means finding appropriate chord for every chromatic note that we encounter. So we're going to start with C. C sharp will have an A7 and D minor. Now I'm going to harmonize the D sharp, but I want to land on a C major chord. Let's look at this. This is a G augmented. G augmented effectively alters the D natural into the D sharp. Okay, let's play so far what we got. Okay, sounds good. Between E and F there is no chromaticism, so I'm gonna just move to F. But between F and G there is a chromaticism, and the F sharp I'll harmonize it with D7. Why? Because it's the dominant of G. Now between G and A, I find G sharp. I'm gonna harmonize G sharp with a diminished 7, landing on A minor. Let's play the whole thing so far. Sounds good. Now, the A to B has, of course, the A sharp, and I'm going to use a diminished 7. The chord that I'm interested here is not B diminished, which will be the 7th chord in the key of C major, but it will be an inversion of the chord of G, this one. And I'm landing there via diminished chord. Sounds good. Let's play from G to A minor and then to G. And of course, there is no chromaticism between B and C. Let's play the whole scale now. Okay, let's start. This is a good start of your harmonic exploration in the chromatic world. Make sure that you do this slowly and carefully. Write down as many notes as you can, and if everything feels clear, try experimenting with other possible solutions. For example, try harmonize the same scale, but going downwards this time. I suspect the best solutions are not going to be the same as the going up, the ones that we use going upward. So have fun, make sure you explore all your creative potential. And if you love what we're doing at the London Contemporary School of Piano, make sure you head onto our website, contemporaryschoolofpiano.com. You will find a free resource kit that has material from our tutorials and a lot of other cool and musical stuff as well.